Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. I'm Jacko, and very excited to literally have a real life superhero for you on today's podcast. Andrew Tracey, aka AT. Why I'm calling him a superhero will make sense, unless you already know him. He is been in the game for a very long time. He talks about his experience of breath training, specifically for over the last 15 years. He is the fitness editor for Men's Health and is like the most genuine, honest, loving, lovely guy that I think we'll possibly be able to introduce to you on the podcast. And there's a lot of amazing guests who have. So, but he is right up there as just like genuine, honest, authentic, and yeah, a student of life, I think is fair to say. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to have him onto the podcast. We talk about a number of parts of his journey of breathing. We get into a little bit of philosophy. We're going to do a follow-up podcast episode because there's 2 hours of meditation that we need to talk about with him, which we didn't get a chance to go into, so that will be coming. But I hope this is very thoughtful for you. Some real big, he gives us three big practical applications for your breathing within your training to for you to benefit from literally straight away. Whether you're going to go training out for a run, or you're going to do a CrossFit session, or whatever it is that you're going to do, you're going to go in the gym later today or tomorrow, you can use those 3 tips. Very simple, very practical, very easy to get into play. They come towards the end of the podcast. So you have that to look forward to from Andrew Tracey on the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. And just before we get started with introducing you to Andrew Tracey AT, just a massive thank you to the Between Breaths podcast sponsors, HVMN, who provide our ketone IQ from HVMN. Come in both the little, I like to use the shots when I've got an endurance event, an ultra marathon over the weekend. They'll be used during that. But my sort of daily go-to ketones are a clean fuel source directly that the brain is able to use. So bypasses that glucose production. I've talked a lot about how that's very important during the acute phase of a brain injury. But I myself, I'm 10 years on from my brain injury, and I know a lot of you have maybe never had a brain injury, but would still benefit from the improvement in sleep, the improvement in focus, in concentration, and energy levels by utilizing a ketone IQ product. There she is, those that are watching on YouTube. This is something I use daily, morning, before bed. It's something that I would highly recommend if you haven't ever tried supplementing with something like ketones. You don't have to be on a ketogenic diet, but you get all the benefits from directly supplementing with the ketones themselves. They're very kind in that they give us a 20% discount. So if you use the code JACKO, you can get 20% off your ketone IQ at hvmn.com. Or if you click the link below, which will be www.hvmn.com/Jacko, that link will automatically apply the 20% discount code for you. So head over to hvmn.com/Jacko now. Well, not now, once you've listened to the podcast, and then you can go and do it. Here's Andrew Tracey, aka AT, aka Superman, aka my new man crush, or not my new man crush. I've had a crush on him for a while, on the Between Breaths podcast. Okay, so very excited for this good friend, and I'm calling him the fitness philosopher. We'll get into what that may or may not mean, but Andrew Tracey, aka AT, welcome to the Between Breaths podcast.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
I'm going to start us off in a slightly lighter mood I'm going to throw 2 things out there. One is, this is the potential, I'm going to throw this out there, that we've got possibly 2 of the greatest haircuts in the fitness industry colliding together in this podcast. And there's only two of us here, so that's me and you.
Ah, thank God. I thought there was someone just off shot, and I was like, "Are you talking about me?"
And, but we will get into fitness, conditioning, breathing, and breath training, and we will also slide our way in towards the end, in towards I think what seems to be possibly the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning most, around philosophy. So, but before we get to that, we were just talking about names, and something I've got a couple of important life rules. Rule one is, if you see the sea, you have to go in it. Rule two
Like,
is, you have to always have a girlfriend or a wife with small hands. You can work that one out. And then rule three is, never trust a man with two first names. And we were just joking with you around people either call you AT for sure, or your full name, Andrew Tracey. And then I thought,
yeah.
oh, hold on a minute, I don't know if I have a rule for, because Tracy's a girl's name. Do you?
Yeah, I kind of I've thought about this a lot, because obviously I've heard that before. Never trust a man with two first names, and I
Does it
think
count
I
if
kind
it's a
of
girl's
just
name?
skirt it, because it's obviously, yeah, it's a female name. I think I kind of just skirt it. My full name, I've actually got three first names technically. My full name is Andrew Adam Tracey, and
Right.
I was supposed to be called Adam, and then
AAT.
yeah, my name's AAT. At the last minute, that was the switch was done. But yeah, people, for some reason, I've never been an Andrew. It's always Andrew Tracey. It's always like it's always like I'm appearing in court.
No, no, I see it more like it's like a superhero. You know, you don't call Clark Kent Clark, or you might call him Superman, but it's so Andrew Tracy. It's like, I don't know, it sounds like a superhero.
I appreciate that. That's a really nice way to look
Well,
at it. Yeah.
for people that maybe don't know that you are actually a real life superhero, a quick whistle stop tour, because people didn't listen to us, scientists should tune in to listen to us talking about stupid rules of life and names. But like, who is Andrew Tracy, the superhero? Who is AT? And yeah, what's that sort of journey into where you are now?
Okay, I'll speed round this one,
Yeah.
because I know in the past I've gone 2 hours just telling this story. But um, okay, so the cliff notes, the bullet points I tend to lay out are: I didn't grow up playing any team sports. I come from a fairly rough sort of council estate, on a fairly rough sort of council estate town. I wasn't raised playing football, and there wasn't the money where I lived to play rugby. No one played rugby. That was for the town over. So I really didn't. I didn't even think about fitness as a concept. I know I didn't like sport, and I was just a massive toe rag. I was just an absolute little shit in my youth. So anything you might now concede is fitness came from running away from people that you don't want to,
Love
let
that.
them get their hands on you. Um, the closest I ever come to anything like a sport was in the early days of free running or parkour.
Right.
We enjoyed that, but I think that really was just an excuse to climb on the roofs of shopping centres, that sort of thing. So I, I guess, looking back, knowing what I know now, I was fairly athletic. I was definitely spry.
Yeah.
I refer to that as toe rag fitness.
Right.
Uh,
Well, it's the
Fairly functional.
same as what I did in rugby. I spent rugby. It was like running away from people that I didn't want
Exactly,
to get me, which is
exactly
actually, I
that.
was thinking, that's
Yeah,
the same thing,
exactly
because I
that.
was scared of big guys.
Yeah. And I grew up doing all the sort of usual sort of rebellious countercultural stuff. I was a skater, or did BMX, or I was in those sort of cultures. And then at 16 or 17, I can never remember which, 17, I think, I took a job in a gym, literally just for beer money, literally because I needed a job.
Right.
And it was there, and it was a real spit and sawdust bodybuilding type gym. This is the time, obviously I'm 34 now, so it's literally half my life.
Hmm.
This was a time when there were either leisure centres, and the big chain gyms were kind of just cropping up. But I
Yeah.
do remember there were two personal trainers in my town. That was it. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was one guy that had this private studio. Like, personal training wasn't really a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I worked at this real bodybuilding style gym, and it was an amazing place to be at 16, actually, because it was where all the doormen, all the bouncers in my town, it's where they all trained, and obviously I was there all the time. I get to know these guys, and an amazing group of guys. So to be someone like me, 16, 17 years old, 10 stone soaking wet, weak as anything, sparrow ankles, which I've still got, unfortunately, but and also all these huge, like real meathead type, dodgy guys are, taking me under their wing, and it was a really amazing place to start out. I think a real sort of not really a trial by fire, but I guess if you'd started in a different environment, that environment might be really intimidating.
Yeah.
Whereas it was so far away because I'm a young lad and these people are going to be intimidating in any environment.
Yeah.
That was great, and I just fell in love with it, and I was in the gym for like 9-10 hours a day working there, and Enzo, who owned the gym, an incredible guy, I owe so much to him. Everything I do now, really. He had a ton of books, and we're going back a while, so he had like these VHSs and DVDs, and I would just read everything I could about physiology, about training, talk to everybody I could.
Mm.
I did all the stuff that you do. I became qualified as a fitness instructor and then a personal trainer, etc.
Yeah.
And started working with people there. And I found myself, the town that I grew up in is kind of just outside of the M25, just outside of London. So there is this kind of thing of, if you're going to make it, you're gonna make it in a big city, kid.
Right.
So eventually I sort of found my way working in big commercial gyms there, which absolutely crushed my soul. Um,
Right.
I think this was probably this would have been the early days of CrossFit was just kind of coming up.
Yeah.
I used to get I can't even remember where from, but the old CrossFit journals, and I'd be reading about all this stuff that was so different
Mm.
to, everyone kind of played it safe. You'll remember, like, there was a time when what we call functional fitness now, functional fitness is kind of the term you'd use to reference doing stuff stood on a Bosu ball,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
kind of kneeling on a Swiss ball, doing replicating golf swings on cables, or the pull check type stuff. So it was
Yeah.
very different. And a lot of the trainers very much kind of played it safe. This is not to disparage anyone. This was
Yeah.
just the industry at the time. It was
Yeah.
very much like, you get people doing their almost like a body part split using a lot of machines, etc., etc., etc. And people would literally laugh at me if I've got my clients doing loaded carries around the gym and
Yeah.
stuff like that, which is so interesting because it's just so huge now.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I kind of just got really burnt out of that. So I kept a few of my clients on, and I thought I don't want to work in the city anymore because everything was so. I hate money. I don't know if it's a consequence of my upbringing, but I have just no concern for, not in the sense of I've got money so I don't care, in the sense of
Yeah.
like I'm not financially driven, and seeing kind of your clients always being viewed as cash cows.
Yeah.
It just didn't. It was icky for me at the time, and
Sure.
I was a young lad as well, and I was very rebellious and didn't like authority. So I ended up kind of keeping a few of my. Also, I was one of the rare trainers that actually wrote programs for their clients. Like a lot of, and bear in mind, I'm talking quite top end gyms here, like very
Yeah.
expensive. I was working in the financial district. Clients would come in, you'd do your session a week, 2 sessions a week. And I'd be laughed at. I'd be like, "What are you doing there?" And I'm like, I'm writing my guy his program for tomorrow when he's not with me." And they'd be like,
Yeah.
"Well, he's not paying you for that." And I'm like, "Well, he's paying me to get results,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
he's not going to get it in 1 or 2 days a week." And I left working in these gyms, and I kind of wanted to have a little career break, but I actually kept a few of these guys on as remote clients, and this is
Right.
pre-social media, so
Wow.
there was no sort of
You're the pioneer.
template for that. Yeah, I just knew it. I was doing programming for these guys, so they were like, "Well, can we keep doing it?" So
Yeah.
I did
Well, I
that.
feel like there's a bit in. So just to sort of jump, there's a bit in there that this is a phrase I sort of said to someone the other day is like doing the right thing. I think it's a Gary Vee saying actually, but it's probably not even. He's probably said it to someone else as well. But doing the right thing is always the right thing. In that
Mm,
you knew the right thing to do for that client to help him get what he wanted was for him to have a program as
yeah,
well as when he's with you. And yeah, I just love that. I love that. I think one of the things that I and everyone that knows you loves about what you do is it's it is just the honesty. It's just fully there. There's no, as you're describing here now in the story up to it, like, but it's just carried on. There's no BS. There's no pretending. There's no nothing. There's no money making scheme or funnel to get in here or there's none of that. It's just like, here it is. This is me. This is what I want to share with you, and I think this is going to help. And um, yeah, that's a testament to you as an individual.
Thank you. I really appreciate that one.
No, no.
Without meaning to derail the conversation, one thing I think about a lot is, all you really have, whether you work for someone else, whether you work for yourself, whatever you're doing in life, you're always accountable to yourself. And at a certain point, no matter what you're doing, you kind of decide what your standards are.
Yeah.
And you just deliver on them, like whatever the situation. Once you've established, like, well, what does this mean to me and what am I willing to do here? I was not always like this. Like, I was very much, I would butt heads with any authority figure, and
Yeah.
it's exhausting. It's exhausting,
Yeah.
right? And eventually you kind of realize, and never kind of from a back, always kind of from the point of view of very sort of arrogant, like, no, I know I'm right here, so we're going to do it this way. But it's, life doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And eventually I realized you've sort of got to pivot towards peace and work in, be good at working environments for other people. But the one thing I've always maintained is, once you've sort of fleshed out what your personal standards are, just maintain those, whether you're working for someone else. We all know people who go to a job and they have that, you see this in so many workplaces, this sort of culture of them and us. And this, like, well, don't do anything you're not getting paid for, and well, you're not, and we'll get into this in a second, but I kind of wanted to take let's do it now, actually. I wanted to take a career break. I carried on doing this remote stuff. I carried on working, kind of doing blogging and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, I'm going to take a few months and I'm just going to do something slightly different. I had a lot going on in my personal life at the time. I had a daughter at a very, very young age, and it was a sort of very tumultuous time for me. And
so how old is she now?
Yeah, she is 14.
Nice.
So yeah, I've had skin in the day. I don't talk about this a lot on social media, but sometimes when I cop the "wait till you have kids" line, I'm kind of like, okay.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to take a career break, and I'm just going to sort of just do something else, and just keep the main thing was, it reignited my passion for like going to seminars and working with other coaches and stuff like that, because that's the bit that kind of died in this sort of commercial. Okay. I'm in this place, I'm in the center of London, everything's going on. I can go and train with all these amazing people, and I don't want to, and I didn't want to feel like that. So I thought, well, let me do something else to fund, living, and then I can go back to doing this as a passion. And kind of working on my own terms as such, in terms of who I work with, etc. That is something that also that has kind of carried through. And so I ended up like just taking a job in the events industry, like events construction, like literally building, massive temporary grandstands and superstructure type, like tensile structures, marquees, that sort of thing. And that was only supposed to be for like 6 months, because it was the summer. I was like, I'll do this for summer, I'll get some money behind me. So there's stuff going on with my living situation and whatever. I just wanted to get some money behind me. And it was around the time of the London Olympics. So that, that was a booming time for that industry. The company I was working for had picked up a lot of these contracts to do these builds. And I have a reasonably good head on me. I'm a good mechanical mind, and I don't mind working hard.
Yeah. So
very quickly, and I can like read and write and send an email. So that leveled me up. I ended up like project managing some of these massive builds from a construction viewpoint on the Olympics, the hockey arena, the wheelchair tennis, the basketball arena, like these huge jobs. And I just kind of got swept up in it. And out the back end of it, there were people that wanted me to keep working for them. And so I've got a couple of younger brothers who had come on board and started doing this work with me, just because we needed guys. And out the back end of it, I had this amazing network. So I started my own company,
Yeah.
impossible structures, just literally driving around the country, like building these huge superstructures
And training wherever
in
you parked up.
yeah, well, this is it. Then I was traveling around the country, and I was kind of like, right, I need to stay in shape because set a precedent. I'm still working with a few remote clients,
Yeah.
and I'm writing, and I'm doing the things. I'm going to the seminars, etc. Okay, I need to keep my training up. And I was staying in these like crappy travel lodges, 7 days a week, sort of 25 to 28 days a month working, no kitchen, obviously no gym facilities in a
Yeah.
£29 a night hotel. So I just started training. Like, I really did realize that the one big privilege I did have was an education in this industry, like
Yeah.
an understanding of fundamental principles.
Yeah.
And I started kind of doing this experiment of how can I extrapolate these principles that I know to work into any environment. So I started doing odd bits and bobs, and I would buy, I'd buy, like, I bought a kettlebell off of, wouldn't even, off probably off of Gumtree at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was getting in, a good nick, and I was actually feeling pretty good. And it was all killer, no filler, because I had just the basics. There was no fluff, and I'm
Yeah.
just kind of exposing myself to these basic principles and finding methods of using them within the confines of what I have, within the constraints of what I have. So then it became an experiment of, well, okay, let's see if I can run this protocol. Let's see if there's a version of GBT I can do with, literally some old rope, doing pull-ups and a fire escape and a
Yeah.
couple of dumbbells. And it went like that. And then a friend of mine, Tom Kemp, he started running Farm Fitness, and I was right at
Yeah.
the beginning helping him to establish this and helping him to establish kind of what the ethos and training philosophy is there. So we started doing competitions and stuff. So now I'm
Yeah.
looking and going, well, can I enter a strongman competition only training with what I have in my van?
Yeah.
So I've got a sandbag. We stand by the beach. I'd fill up this like 70, 80 kilo sandbag. I train with that. And I had started accruing a fair amount of kit at this point, but it was all stuff I was just getting from,
That's what
like,
you could find.
what I could find. And then I started working with Bulldog,
Yeah.
and lucky to be furnished with stuff there. But still, again, it was basically like a D-ball in the back of my van,
Yeah.
or a couple of heavy dumbbells or whatever.
Yeah.
And that really did became my, I guess, my like social media niche, because I was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the weird guy training in car parks just out the back of his van or in
Yeah.
fields at lunchtime. But it also really helped to sharpen the axe of
Yeah.
my training ability, or my training knowledge. And I think it gave me a good sort of apprenticeship in the extremes of what people who don't abide in our realm of fitness kind of experience. Because I was on site like 14 hours a day. I'd leave the house at 4:30 in the morning. I might not come home. I might be away in hotels for
Yeah.
a couple of weeks. So I had this kind of real extreme baptism of being someone that doesn't have the luxury of being in the gym all day. And I know that comes with its own
Yeah.
inherent, you know, and that, I think, gave me a really good touching point on, hey, look, we have all this information that's great in theory, that's great in, you know, on a research paper.
Yeah.
How does it extrapolate out? How does it map onto
Yeah.
real people in the real world? And I feel that I needed that period
Yeah. Well,
of that.
sorry, as a from an observer during that period, I think is when I probably came across you. Like, it was very clear that you were doing the practical application. You could, you could see you doing the practical application of it, and just by seeing you do it and your actions do it, it would challenge a lot of our ways of thinking, because you typically go, oh well, when I'm in this sort of scenario, I haven't got this type of kit, then I can't really do X, Y, Z. And then you flick over at AT or Andrew Tracey's superhero car park training session, and you're like, oh, well, he's just shown me that what I'm saying is just a lie to myself. Yeah, I think is there an element from you that, because you were training sort of in such unconventional environments during that time and had to think outside the box, and you were very used to being unconventional with your training, when something like, obviously I want to get stuck into some of the breath training sort of side of things, did the fact that you were very unconventional with your training mean that exploring something that typically is, let's say, still at the moment, slightly unconventional to hold your breath whilst doing a farmer's carry for some of the reasons that we'll get to talk about, or think about your breathing to help you with your recovery, like some of those concepts are still a little alien to people, hopefully those not listening to the podcast. But do you think it was easier for you to get on board with, okay, well, I've experimented with all this other unconventional stuff, did that make it easier for you to sort of go into breath training and experience that? And when did, okay, it's a three-pronged question, that then when did that actually start? And also, just for those that maybe don't know, like, how do you go from training in a car park to being the fitness editor at Men's Health? Like, that's like quite a big, people like myself.
Big promotion, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's like, but like we've all, like, as a kid, like looked at Men's Health, been like flipping heck, and then it's like, I'm certainly interested in that transition, but also with the breath, like where did that come into play?
So to answer your first question, this is possibly like a chicken and an egg situation. There's certainly the possibility that because I was like, I'd completely broken I'd broken the cycle. I'd broken this like mold of how and what and where we do things. That became my sort of mantra, was like, you are not your gym membership. Eventually you realize that these things confine you, because you're like, well, training is done in the gym. So if I don't have access to a gym, guess I'm not training. So there is the possibility
That's
that
the start of your philosophy thinking, though, right?
you are
Potentially.
not, it's
Yeah.
obviously a riff on the, on Tyler Durden, on the Fight Club, like,
Yeah.
you're not your fucking car keys. But yeah, you're not your gym. Like, the idea is, when you let something, this one's all me though, but when you let something define you, you let it confine you. Like, as soon as you have a definition of what you
Yeah.
are, what you do, where you do it, those become constraints. So there's very much the possibility that having kind of
Yeah.
shaken off those constraints as such, that leaves you then wide open to achieve new stuff. However, it could also be the case that, I think, because of, and this is, I credit a lot of how I think, etc., to the fact that I didn't grow up playing organized team sports. I didn't do any of this. I did the counterculture things. I did skateboarding. I did BMXing,
Yeah.
and that world is very much about, you know, it's a bit different now because there's so many amazing facilities. But when I was growing up, it was
Yeah.
you just had to go and find somewhere to
Yeah.
skate.
There
You
weren't
went and
rules.
found it. No,
Yeah.
no, exactly. You were kind of, I was kind of embodying that. You are not your, you are not your skate park there, I guess. But
Have you still got a skateboard? I've still got one.
yeah, I've got one in the garage. I've got
Right,
a couple. I've got a
we're skating
longboard,
next
and
time.
let's do
Can
it.
we meet? Right.
So yeah, there's, but maybe I'm just geared that way to look at, other things. Um, so that may well be why I was quite. So I don't remember ever thinking of breathwork as being particularly woo woo
Right.
or particularly out there. I think I was really lucky, and this will get on to your second question now. I was really lucky very early on. I don't know if you know of Jim Jones and Mark Twight and that whole scene.
Mark Twain.
Mark
Yeah.
was, because, again, I think because I was a rebellious little shit. Mark was very attractive to me.
Right.
It was kind of the opposite of CrossFit, or it was kind of
Yeah.
like the less polished. It was more me. And Jim Jones had a workout very early on, which was a kettlebell breathing ladder, and it was, it's
Right.
essentially a 1 to 20 kettlebell swings with a breath in between each one, but your breathing goes up in the ladder. So 1 to 20 kettlebell swings, 1 to 20 breaths. And I think because I was so bought in to Mark's philosophy, I just did it. Like, I
You
didn't
didn't
give it a
question
second
it.
thought.
Right.
And then we're going back like probably 15 years now, but
Yeah.
then you very quickly realize, oh, actually,
Yeah.
how I breathe here is just as important as how I do these reps.
I think that's
And that,
important for people to just, as soon as you like play, try, explore, experiment with something to do with your breathing whilst you're working out, it's a great opportunity to do it because it'll be challenged. you, one, I think, notice that it really can be challenged. Two, you notice that you can actually try to manipulate it. And then I think by knowing that it can be challenged and knowing that you can manipulate it, you sort of piece together the idea that, or just the principle and understanding of like, well, actually, this is a system like any other system within my body, and I can actually train it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of those things that it's a case of, and you see this in every field, and you see it many times in fitness. It's a case of we are constantly stepping over pounds to pick up pennies, right? And sometimes it's simply because something seems so obvious
Yeah.
that it's like, well, that can't be the thing then, right? I always liken it to creatine supplementation. Creatine is so cheap, so good that
Good for
people just
brain
forget.
health.
They just, exactly the same cognitive benefits as it has physical benefits by the same mechanism, right?
Yeah.
It's just so good and it's so cheap and it's so widely available and it's so ubiquitous. It's easy just to overlook it.
When it first came out, that it was like people, it was like, oh, is it steroids? Do you know what I mean? It was like
Well,
worry.
people still do, right?
It was
Yeah,
work, but it was, but
yeah.
it's interesting. It is you're right, and it's gone through that transition of like something that's like so amazing
Mm.
to then like, I mean, I think I remember being like probably 17, maybe 18 when creatine started. There was a rugby player in South Africa who took it and really bulked up, and everyone was like, wow. And then it was like, oh, I don't know if we should take that. It must be, it's so potent. It must be steroids.
Yeah, and it's the same with the breath, right? It's so obvious and it's such low hanging fruit that, well, you'll hear it all the time. You'll be aware of it. You're like, well, how can that make a difference when it
Yeah.
how can it not?
Yeah, I think that's the
Is the
question,
better
isn't it?
question, right?
I
Yeah.
think that there's a, where do you find, I think this is an interesting point of, for myself, when I went into, I guess I was exploring it initially from a, how's this going to help my brain rehabilitation from a brain injury? Um, Whereas when you're exploring it from a improving performance or improving recovery, maybe we're coming at it, we're approaching it from a different angle, but you probably got the similar types of questions of, I found I was very much uneducated in understanding what good breathing actually looked like. So, okay, diaphragmatic breathing, great. I've learned a word or I'm understanding a word that I knew, but am I doing it? Like, how do I know
Yeah.
if I'm doing it? Is it
How
supposed,
do I embody this? Yeah.
how's it supposed to feel? And like, did you go, I mean, I remember going through that, and I still think it's an ongoing process where I learn things every week or month, where I like playing around with things and realizing, oh crikey, yeah, if I, when I do that, like, oh yeah, no, that sort of feels a little bit better in terms of my mechanics, etc. It's something that for me is always, I think it depends on where you're at. Like I think I've had a lot of dysfunctional breathing for various different reasons. And I think that I've therefore, that there's been a long way to go with it. Whereas so I find it like so fascinating because it's like made such a difference to me. But if someone hasn't got I said this to a group that I'm mentoring at the moment of coaches with the Oxygen Advantage, I was like, I'm going to show you some stuff that's been really beneficial for me. But I was like, if your client doesn't have my problem, they don't need my solution. But
Mhm.
as coaches, we often fall into the trap of thinking, right, this is amazing. Right, everyone needs it. And it's like, well, your solution, unless if they've got your problem, then yes. But not everyone is
Yeah.
going to have the same problem.
I kind of refer to that as like panacea coaching. Like I'm always a bit, you'll see people who they find the thing and they're clearly incredibly passionate about the thing and it's helped them solve a problem and it's no doubt helped them help other people solve a problem.
Yeah.
But how statistically unlikely is it that this one thing solves all problems? And
Yeah.
there's this, I kind of think, becomes a disconnect for people with certain coaches and with certain modalities, that they think I have to go all in on this thing. And you're like,
Yeah.
no, this is actually just a tool. Like, just take what you need from it. You
Yeah.
don't have to fully identify with this thing. You can carry on. So the people, obviously the way we approached it is a little bit different because we really are looking at breathwork from a physiological performance point of view. But I think sometimes when they hear breathwork in terms of uh, how it pertains to the nervous system, and in terms of like breath work facilitation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
People kind of think they maybe struggle to engage with that a little bit because of that affectations, the way it's presented.
Yeah.
There's this element of like woo woo, and people think that, oh well, I'm going to have to start wearing mala beads and going to sound baths, that's not to discredit any of that.
I love a sound
But
bath, by the way.
yeah, likewise. But it is just to say that you don't have to go all in. That's why I'm kind of a little bit gentle. There's a lot of things I do that I don't really touch on that much, because I'd rather feed people the low hanging fruit and find their point of engagement with it, rather than get so far out there that people are like, well, I'm just not interested in any of that. Where because in terms of that and the other side of it, the more woo-woo side of it, like I'm so far gone. Like I am so far. I meditate for 2 hours every day. Like these wisdom traditions are probably the single most important pursuit in my life. The kind of the search for having some kind of for stabilizing some sort of non-dual awareness, but I'm also very aware that you have to meet people where they are. And if I went full in with it, let's have one quick one. Just quickly, I'll cover your last point. I was actually offered the job at Men's Health.
Okay,
So Toby, my boss, asked to meet me. I'd been contributing there for a couple of years for free. I was still working on site, and I would just, at lunchtime, I would stack up pallets and get my laptop out, and I was doing that all at once. And it really just, I think it probably came about because I was in the field, I was doing this stuff. Perhaps it does give me that kind of way of relating to everybody, but alongside the sort of the formal expertise. But let's move on.
No, it's I can't imagine how you managed to sort of juggle everything. What I was expecting you to say at the end of that sentence was that led me to like burnout. That's what I was expecting you to always say. But good on you for keeping the right balance of things. So I want to meet you where you're at. So I want to give us some time to go into what, your face literally lit up then. Anyone that's just listening to this, if you're watching it you can watch on Spotify, you can watch on YouTube. Like your literally face lit up then, and it was like there's just a whole different energy to not that your energy anyway is like very upbeat and everything, but there was like it went to another level then when you were like, let's talk about this other stuff. Let's talk about the woo-woo. But just before we do get to that, but let's leave plenty of time for it. In terms of, we've talked about like the respiratory system, our breathing. It is something that we can train. You've talked a lot about low hanging fruit. It sounds like almost intuitively you came into it with no real misconceptions. You just engaged in it, did it, and then and have explored that for, by the sounds of it, 15 years, so a very long time. What are Andrew Tracey's go-to breath training tips or bits of low-hanging fruit that you would like to share with the listeners? And actually, before you do that, just define for you that difference between breath work in a sort of more, you said, use the word facilitator when we're thinking more of a sort of hyperventilation practice where someone would be lying still and manipulating their breathing to create some physiological responses that can lead to emotional release and that side of things. How is it? What is that definition like for you? Because I've been doing some work to share my thoughts on defining what these two differences are, so people can make informed decisions. But how do you separate those things, or how do you define those things before giving us those low hanging fruit?
Yeah, I think the sort of the delineation between the two is literally how you sort of utilize them, how you put them to use. So if you're doing something physical, then that's that side of how you're utilizing the breath as a tool, how you're manipulating or how you're just giving it conscious attention. And the other side of it is anything where you're looking for these sort of chasing these state changes, and chasing these experiences, which I'd like to get into in a second. But that's kind
Yeah.
of the the only real delineation I see, because it's the mechanics are the same. Obviously, the methods and the techniques that are being employed as such are different, but at the end of the day, it is still
Breathing.
the manipulation of your respiratory system, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I. It's the only real, are you sitting down or lying down with your eyes closed? Um, it's an internal versus external thing. Not that I
Yeah.
don't really particularly think there's any difference. I think it's all
Yeah.
just here, but
Yeah.
that's how I would delineate. And then just looking at how, well, okay, how are we using this? And then in training, maybe I'll delineate between how are we using this to alter our experience, or
Yeah.
kind of play with our experience, and how we're using it to increase our performance. So that would be the
Yeah.
two little things. There's
Yeah.
ways that I think you can just simply use your breath as an object of attention in order to be kind of more, 10 toes on the ground with where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you can manipulate your breath in the capacity of training to
Yeah.
either in the moment
Yeah.
improve or better your performance, or in the case of it, improving your CO2 tolerance, you can train it so that the
Yeah.
knock-on effect, the downstream effect, is
Yeah.
an increase in performance. So that's literally how
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
sort of
No.
delineate them. I don't personally, on the kind of internal, the sitting down side of things, I don't tend to use manipulation of the breath particularly as a sort of gateway into anything, because mainly just because my practices don't. I'm not chasing any experiences.
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking for the experiencer, and I'm not trying to sort of chase states. I'm
Yeah.
trying to create changes in traits,
Yeah.
as such. So I don't really. I pay attention to my breath as part of my for my self inquiry, my meditation practice. I would use my breath as an anchor.
Yeah.
It's hard not to really, obviously, once you have an education and an awareness, it's hard not to think that in some fashion, we have this kind of hierarchy of competence, don't we? Where you're unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, consciously competent, unconsciously competent, and I guess after a while you're going to become unconsciously incompetent.
Yeah.
So, as part of, say, my meditation practice, although all I'm doing initially is using my breath as an object of awareness, like I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily, I do manipulate it actually in some of my shamatha, in some of my concentration practices, which I can go into. But so when I did my sit this morning, uh, because of what I'm trying to do at the moment, I literally just stayed with the breath. Now, naturally, things will happen to your breath if you just stay with them, just as a consequence of that
Yeah.
attention coming in around the breath, that focus, that will naturally have a knock-on effect to your nervous system. And then you kind of get this beautiful outward spiral where, because of that, especially, you're just staying nasal, naturally your exhales are going to start to lengthen, and
Yeah.
you're going to have that sympathetic response, and then you are in this beautiful spiral where you can go, without getting too deep into this, where you can go deeper with it. But I don't tend to actually manipulate my breath in terms of chasing states, because that isn't
Yeah.
really. I'm looking for what's there, not for what I can provoke, or not for what I can cause. Although I do see, I see that the usage in that regard, and I see how powerful it can be for some people.
Yeah.
But I'm just a little bit kind of my quest. This is the title of my, on the front of my meditation journal. It actually says this. What's really here. So I'm not trying to make
Right.
anything happen.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see what's already happening.
Yeah. And that I think you said sympathetic, meaning parasympathetic. When you're in that parasympathetic state, you're able, probably, that we know from like scans on monks meditating and what have you, that the how the brain is functioning in that state is going to open up a little bit more.
Yes, yeah, no, great. That's a great little segue there. So some of the neuroscience behind it, and what, this is all still so fledgling because we literally do. I say we. I'm doing very little towards the research. We, as the
You're
human
doing your own
race,
experiment. You're
yeah.
research on
Well, I
myself.
mean, that's kind of where I'm going to go with this. But we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know why consciousness is. It's so funny that we don't actually know what anything is. Which, that sounds like a lofty thing to
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
but
yeah,
we don't know what this is or why this is. This could be a result of a sufficiently sophisticated enough brain, enough neurons, whatever,
yeah,
the side effect of which could be consciousness, or it could be that everything is just consciousness, and the side effect of that is matter. Obviously, the former is the materialist
yeah,
view of the world, and the latter is everything else. But that's what's so interesting. So everything is kind of up for grabs
yeah,
theoretically, but when you
yeah,
stick experienced meditators, and this varies depending on the tradition, actually, it varies depending on what your background is and what style or school of meditation you come from. But the best guess at the moment, in terms of, I don't want to use any jargon here. I want to make sure I explain everything properly. The areas of the brain that are now labeled the default mode network,
yeah,
they're called the default mode network because when you're not task positive, when you're not actively doing something, these are the areas of your brain that come online. And there's lots of theories as to why this is, but there's nothing solid from a Darwinian, from an evolutionary point of view. We do not know why these areas come online, but these areas are the areas that are mostly, these are the areas that are most coincident with rumination, with self-referential thoughts, with that kind of what in Buddhism is referred to, and other traditions is referred to as the sense of self, like this idea
yeah,
that you have, that you're a little man living inside your head, looking outside of your eyes and sort of piloting your body around.
yeah,
That sense is, and that dissipates. We all experience that dissipating every time we really engage in an activity. You're not engaging in that activity thinking that you're piloting your body around. There's
yeah,
just the activity, because the default mode network, well, this is the strong
yeah,
theory, has gone offline.
yeah,
When we kind of slip into that parasympathetic state, not always, because you can ruminate whilst being in a
yeah,
highly sympathetic state, and we all know that. That's anxiety.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
anxiety really is just kind of imagination gone mad. But if we make the breath the object of our attention, you can lower the activity in the default mode network, because you are in a kind of task positive. You're doing, but eventually enough time in that doing, everything kind of just goes onto autopilot, but the activity in the default mode network is still lower. There's lots of things we can do to that. Just going for a walk in nature will lower the activity in the default mode network. But when they put monks in the scanner, or experienced meditators in the scanner, that's what they tend to find. Now, depending on what tradition you practice in, because they kind of have different aims. Different traditions have a different idea of what the center of the bullseye is. Some, particularly in the non-dual traditions, are just, their default is not to be in the default mode network. Now, that really is an incredible concept. That's something you could get to, because if you think of this rumination, it's when you sit there and you replay conversations in your head. Oh, I should have said this, or randomly a thought arises into consciousness and you latch hold of it and you narrate it. Oh, you're thinking about something that happened 10 years ago, and you're thinking of everything you should have said, or you're imagining, everyone's had this experience where they're like, well, if I go into work later and he says this to me, then I'm going to say this. And they're playing out this scenario that's, it's not even happened. This little sense of self, this little ego, it really is like having the most annoying, boring person in the world follow you around from room to room, and they just won't shut up. And, that lowering of the default mode network, or, if that's not what it turns out to be, it seems like that would be it, is kind of that's the center of the bullseye in terms of getting rid of that. And
Yeah.
so much of our suffering comes from, well, all of our suffering comes from
Yeah.
that place. If
Yeah.
we look at it from the Buddhist point of view, that I think I shared this story the other day on my Instagram, which is the Buddhist story of the two arrows. You get hit with one arrow, and that's pain or misfortune, whatever it may be, that something actually physically happens to you. And then you get hit with a second arrow, but the second arrow is suffering, and that's the story you're telling yourself about this. So something bad happens, and it's happened, it's done.
Yeah.
The second arrow is you going, oh, stuff like this always happens to me.
Yeah.
This wouldn't have happened if I
Your
didn't do blah 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 blah.
processing of it. Yeah.
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 And if we can get to, the goal is to be able to get to a place where you're never going to stop the second arrow, but how we handle it,
Yeah.
you can potentially catch it midair.
Yeah. I've got a lot of questions to ask you
Yeah, sorry, I
about.
put a lot out there then.
No. I've got a lot of questions. I'm making notes, and there may have to be a follow-up where we fully dedicate just purely to talking about meditation and consciousness, but we'll cover it. We will cover it, but I think there's a potential for it. Definitely I would love the follow-up anyway, or we'll just have a chat about it if no one else wants to listen. But just backpedaling for just 2 minutes back to just for someone that's like, hold on, I like what Andrew Tracey does, like smashing stuff in car parks. He hadn't told me yet what's the low hanging fruit that I can do. So I just want to just give people those low hanging fruit headlines of like, from Andrew Tracey, when you're doing some conditioning work, what are some of the like 1, 2, or 3 things that you're manipulating or doing with your breath to create some sort of adaptation from a breathing perspective, or improve your recovery short term, or trying to improve your recovery long term. And I think that one thing I wanted to just sort of precursor anyone that is, I loved what you said about simplifying it, going like, well, if you're manipulating your breathing whilst you're just stationary, then you're doing like some sort of like that more breath work in that respect. If you're doing some sort of activity and training where your breathing rate is automatically going to increase and your breathing volume is automatically going to increase because of CO2 accumulation, blah, 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 then your breath training is, in that scenario, you doing something to like help your performance. And I would actually, and this is not, you made me think this as you were explaining it, I would go one way further and go, even if someone is training with complete unawareness of their breath, they're still training their breath. It just might be negatively. And I think that people need to, if they haven't really thought about their breathing whilst they're exercising, you're providing a stimulus and the body is always adapting. And so if you are, even when you're not training your breath, you are, but just negatively, potentially.
No, you did the perfect analogy the other night while we were on the live, in terms of when you're training the squat. There's certain muscle groups, whatever it may be, or let's just look at the movement pattern in general. If you're just doing it wrong, you're still training. Oh no, actually, let's use another. Let's say we're talking about a row or a pull-up, where the second, whatever you do, you can't get away from the fact that your biceps are coming into play there, whether you pay attention to it or not. But what you can do once you start paying attention to it is manipulate your form to either use them to a greater or a lesser degree. And the breath is the same. Like as a mammal, as a land-dwelling mammal, you cannot get away from the fact that you are using your breath. But to punch down, and I'm glad you did this, by the way, because I hate when I listen to a podcast and I come away with nothing sort of actionable.
What does Andrew Tracey do? Like, what does he do when he's training with his breath?
First and foremost, the low-hanging fruit of improving anything is simply paying attention to it. And that's anything. That's your diet, that's your training, whatever it is. Until you pay attention to it, until you make it conscious, you're not going to change it. With the breath, most people, in my experience, start seeing immediate I would use the word improvements just by paying attention. If you pay attention to something, a lot of times it auto corrects or it course corrects just through having that spotlight of attention put on it. So you're running, you start paying attention to that, and subconsciously you go, oh, that's probably not right. Let me slow
Yeah.
that down a bit, whatever it may be.
Exactly. I think
Then,
intuitively, this is the thing of people. I'll do myself out of a job in that, like, you don't, and I'm quite happy to do it. You don't need a coach most of the
yeah,
time because intuitively, when you're panting like that, what as soon as you place their attention on it, what do? You don't. You've got two options. You're either going to slow it down or speed it up or keep it the same. You're aware that it doesn't feel good, and you know that just breathing faster isn't going to make me feel any better.
yeah,
So you're just following in your intuition. You're going
yeah.
to do a bloody good job.
Yes, precisely that. I think it's Nietzsche that said there is wisdom in this body that exceeds. I can't remember the exact quote,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
essentially
Go
like,
inward.
you're built to do it.
Yeah,
So, like I say, the first thing is just paying attention. Now, if we're resistance training, now, have to go a little bit deep here. All the time, there is an experience. There's qualia. There's experience of being you. In fact, you probably are the experience of being you. The more things that are going on, the more things there are that can steal your attention.
yeah,
If you can bring some of those things into alignment, now the things you just don't want to pay attention to. When I'm training, I don't really want to pay attention to the thought in my head that's going, "What's for dinner tonight?" So you can instantly just ignore that. But in terms of what's actually going on,
protein shake.
obviously, yeah.
Great
Um,
with creatine.
with creatine, if you can align a few objects of that experience, it makes them much easier to pay attention to.
Right.
So for me, the very first thing, especially when it comes to lifting, is aligning. And from a mechanical point of view, this
Yeah.
is just way better. So it's a double bubble here.
Yeah.
Is paying attention to where and when you're breathing in accordance to easy to think about it, the eccentric and concentric of
Yeah.
your movement. Now, we actually all kind of know this. Most of us have been taught this at some point, but again, we just think, oh, what's breathing got to do with bench pressing?
Yeah.
But from a physiological as well as an experiential point of view, when we can actually pay attention to that,
Yeah.
we get a little bit of a better grasp on what's going on. So a really prime example would be, let's say we're doing, let's say the bench press or the squat, although that's a bit more technical. Nice big inhale on the eccentric as we're lowering and explode up. Now we can, once we sync that breath to that rep, we're kind of getting everything in alignment. So we can start paying attention to the minutiae of what's going on instead of getting spun out when things start getting hard and you're just like, oh shit, this is horrible, this is hard. Okay, but what is
Yeah.
hard, what is horrible? Once you can sync all of that, it gives you a much clearer picture. Everything's less jumbled.
There's something
The
really
next
there's on there's something really interesting on that. So you're talking about like resistance and lifting heavy.
Mhm.
There is some stuff that people will have seen from me where I encourage people to dissociate their movement from their breathing to provide some resilience and some options. But that would be not in a strength scenario. That'd be like in a body weight unloaded movement.
Yeah,
But in a strength scenario, syncing that inhalation, we say nice big inhalation, a common one that people would like understand and potentially talk about creating intra-abdominal pressure, which helping
yeah,
stabilize lumbar pelvic hip complex, which is fine. But one thing that people probably aren't that much aware of is like how it plays into our neurology in that our exhalations and our inhalations are linked to muscle tone. So a strong inhalation can help increase extension tone, and strong exhalation increase flexion tone. And what you just described on your bench press was like during the lowering phase where I'm going into more of an extension pattern,
yep,
I'm biasing that with my breath and that will help with actually the tone of the muscle tissue sort of globally. And when you do that forceful exhale, you are helping the excitability of the medulla, which helps with flexion tone, and you're doing a flexion pattern as you press that back up. So it doesn't matter whether you know which parts of the brainstem you're manipulating or not, but understanding that actually your breathing will influence or can be used to influence muscle tone, which will
yeah.
help with performance, as well as the other bits around intra-abdominal pressure, as well as just awareness and as you're saying, like dialing into what it is that you're doing and not thinking about dinner tonight and what's in your protein shake.
Yeah, and it gives you something very, there's so many physiological points, as you just said there, where it makes sense. And obviously it differs, squatting, you're not going to be inhaling all the way through the eccentric. You're going to be taking that inhale at the top, creating that intra-abdominal pressure, which is, again, a really great physiological benefit to doing this, to paying attention to what you're doing. You watch anyone who lifts heavy, or, you know,
Yeah.
sucking the air in, creating abdominal pressure. But I think the other thing it does, it gives you something very real and very concrete, and something that's very much there to come back to when the shit hits the fan. And this is more
Yeah.
from a conditioning point of view. It gives you something to come back to. And I think so many people they're trying to escape the experience, but attempting to escape the experience is a thought that you're adding. You're adding the thought of, I want to escape the experience. You're not going to, unless you stop, you're not going to escape. Like, everything's happening is happening. If you actually come into something that is concrete, the breath's a good place to start, and then the body, and then really pay attention to the experience, like a high definition attention to what's happening, not trying to run away from it, be with it. Because once you get with it, you can actually see what's really happening, and you can really then start to separate. Oh, okay, well, I'm breathing, so that's good. I'm not actually suffocating. Because how many people have this experience where the story they're telling themselves about what's happening doesn't actually match with what's going on?
Yeah.
And instead of trying to run away from it and just writing, you're just writing another section to that story then. And then I tried to run away from it. If you come to it, then you can really go, well, what are the actual somatic experiences here? And the breath gives you something very concrete to come back to. It's real, it's there, you know, it's true. It's not a thought about what's going on. But then you can double down on that by manipulating the breath to control, you know, your tone, and to, you know, shift your state.
Yeah.
Is the way I'm breathing right now most skillful for what I'm doing right now and what I intend to do in the next moment, in the next moment, in the next moment? And we spoke about this the other night. Often your body's natural response is not possibly not that natural, because it's a conditioned response from years of doing, you know, having dysfunctional breathing or dysfunctional movement. And B, it's predicated on the idea that your body's trying to get you out of the shit there and then.
Yeah.
You know, your body detects, you know, a certain chemical environment, a certain physiological environment, and it's like, well, this is what I need to be doing in this environment right now to make it better. But what your body doesn't know, what your body can't know, is that you're not going to stop. So its response is designed to, if you stopped right now, this would be the most efficient way to get you back to homeostasis, to get you back to, you know, where we want to be. That's not going to be the best thing if you're going to keep going. And this is what we see all the time when people get gassed, right? They get gassed.
Yeah, we said this. It's a common thing that people say, that they go, if it's natural for me to go to mouth panting me, that's what my body just naturally wants to do. Why isn't that then? Surely that is the most efficient. My body's going to do the most efficient thing. And I always say a couple of things, like, one, just because it's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal. And I think you were explaining very nicely here as to why it's potentially not optimal. And also, the body will always go for the path of least resistance. It will do what's easiest, and it's easier to potentially pant, but it doesn't mean you're actually either one, like you say, going to help you go further. And we were talking on the Instagram live that we did and I said this notion of I don't know, I haven't got any data and research studies to back it up, but I'm fairly certain that the fact that we mouth pant like that is the body's way of, it's like the emergency, hitting the emergency alarm, the escape route of, like, I'm going to make this, I want us to stop. And in order to make you stop, I'm basically going to really breathe really badly and in a really stressful way, to the point where you then go, okay, I'm stopping.
Yeah, it's just a response, isn't it? It's you know, it really is. In some ways, it's a simple system. You know, you're having a reaction to a rising of a chemical that's your body detects and goes, okay, vent this chemical, vent this chemical. And there's an analogy here with submarines and Freon, but I think you need to know loads more to get it. But like, that would be the best possible. Yeah, great. So CO2 is rising. That's a bad thing, or, you know, not a bad thing, but from the body's point of view right now, it's too much.
Too much of anything.
Stop and vent.
Apart from love. You can always have
Yeah.
more love. Has anyone ever
Yeah.
died from love? Probably not. Maybe that's I always says too, because like water's good for you, but you can drown. Um,
Yeah. That
so
is monotonic. Yeah.
so awareness was first. Like when and where, in particular within the movement that you're potentially doing, is
Yeah.
syncing your breath for that. The third one then, like how does somebody or how does Andrew Tracey not get to that poor mouth panting breathing when you're training as your third and final tip for someone?
Just you've brought awareness to it, and now you think, what am I doing in the next moment? The next moment, what's going to be the most skillful thing? What's going to be the most skillful meeting in the middle of where my physiology is at right now
Yeah,
and where I want it to go? And
I
that's
like
where
that.
we start looking at and obviously it does depend on how long you've got to go
Yeah,
and what you've got to do in that time.
yeah,
And then we start looking at how can we come down those breathing gears. So we for anyone who doesn't know, you sort of divvy these breathing patterns up, and at the very top or bottom end, whichever way you want to look at it.
yeah.
And it gets confusing because car gears kind of go the other way, right? Because you're going to be cruising in fifth gear. At one end, we've got just a controlled, not even controlled, just a very natural nasal inhale and a long nasal exhale. And you've actually got a bit of room either side of those. You could do a hold and it wouldn't be too comfortable because you're
Yeah,
very balanced.
yeah.
And then we work all the way down. And at the other end, so we work down from you've got the inhale starts increasing and the exhale still through the nose, but starts getting a bit sharper. We're trying to get rid of a bit more
Becomes
CO2.
active rather than
Yeah,
passive. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And then we've got this nasal inhale still, but we're starting to force a little bit. We're dumping that CO2 out of the mouth. Now, it's a bigger orifice, so more can get out at once. And then at the very far end, we're panting, we're mouth breathing out. So just assess where you are now, pay attention to it. What's your breathing doing right now?
yeah.
What do you need to do next? And what's going to be the most skillful means by which to do that next thing, or what gear do I want to be in to
Yeah.
be most efficient here, and just start working your way down. Now, if you want to maintain that current pace, you don't want to slow down, you want to maintain your current pace, then it's going to be a case of coming down the gears, just working down the gears. If you can afford to slow down, then perhaps slowing down and throttling, like allowing let's say I know I'm doing this for a long time, so I need to get to the point where I'm nose in, nose out, even if that's a kind of I
Yeah.
want to get back to nasal. Well, maybe I throttle my pace to a point where I can comfortably do that. And this isn't an on or off. This isn't
Yeah,
like
yeah,
at this speed you can do this. It's
yeah.
probably going to feel really uncomfortable.
And it's
So the
and it's
heuristic,
trainable in that your
yeah,
ability to nasal breathe very much linked to our aerobic threshold, and therefore when you start to improve your aerobic threshold, when you improve your lactate threshold through conditioning work and breathing as part of that,
mm,
you're going to be able to yeah, change where those limits for your on each of those
yes, yeah,
gears or each of those stages is going to be.
on a
Yeah,
physiological level and also on a kind of comfort level.
yeah, yeah,
So this is we all deal with this when we the first time. We all have people go. I tried to go out for I tried to run like coming all through like all nasal. I just couldn't do it. It was so hard. Now the person's fit enough. I've met some people who are way fitter than I am who struggle like to do it, and it's
yeah.
just the comfort thing. It's not necessarily it's not their chemoreceptors. It's not their CO2 tolerance necessary. It's not their CO2 tolerance in terms of their
There can
actual
be some
fitness.
adaptation
Yeah.
that it'd be more muscularly what's going on, okay, but
Mm.
potentially how they're both psychologically as well as potentially some chemoreceptivity around like when they're maintaining that nasal breathing, they're not getting rid of the CO2 as quickly as they would normally do,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that's
Exactly. Yeah.
playing a role in their psychological relationship, what that
Yeah.
feeling feels like, and just the
And this is a
ability to
feedback loop.
yeah, and the ability to use the nose. Like typically we say sort of 6 to 12 weeks. So for some of the adaptations, if someone's really not used to nasal breathing, that it can with exercise that it can take
Yeah.
that sort of time. But it varies on person. I've had people like within a week or within their first session they feel better nasal breathing, and then you've got people like me who it took flipping months and months. So it's very individual. But my advice for people is always, if you try to go and do some low level aerobic work and try to do it all nasally in, nasally out, and you find it terribly hard to do that and stressful almost, like that is a sign that your nose has become deconditioned. Your nose is an organ designed for breathing. It ain't got
Yeah,
much else that it does. It does some smelling, but the main thing it does is breathing.
yeah.
And if you can't use it very well, then that is a sign that you need to do something about it. But yeah,
Yeah, and I think the thing we have to be careful of is kind of offering it up, like, and this is kind of some of the resistance you see against it now because there is a time and a place
yeah,
for mouth breathing, and if you're always throttling your performance, you have to kind of look at the on the timeline you have, is the juice worth the squeeze? So if the
yeah,
sport you're in or the pursuit you're doing requires quite a high level of, borderline anaerobic conditioning, then if you're consistently throttling yourself to nasal breathing, you're not
yeah,
going to get the muscular adaptations you need because you're not going to be hitting that right
yeah,
intensity, right?
yeah.
But you are,
Well,
it's being aware that all those gears are there.
yeah.
It's not, nasal, you
Well,
can't nasal breathe your way through every challenge.
yeah,
But knowing to come back to that is
yeah.
the important thing, and I think
For
that's
your
where
recovery.
people aren't necessarily meeting in the middle at the moment, because you've got people whose kind of whole online social media presence is debunking whatever other people are
Yeah,
doing, who are saying, if you're mouth taping, then you're stopping yourself from getting it. Now, yeah, I agree. If you have someone, let's say, I don't know, say someone whose sport is something like football or rugby, and they do all they ever do is run, mouth tape nasal, are they necessarily going to get the higher end
yeah.
adaptations
They
they need for
expose.
sprinting and recovery? They're
We've
not
got
being
to be,
exposed to it. Yeah.
yeah, we've got to be sensible, and we've got to understand. It's like, for me, I've got some quite strong views on. Um, the conversation is not about whether we're nasal breathing or mouth breathing. The conversation, when we're talking about breath training, from my perspective, the conversation, I think, I can't see anybody arguing about this. The conversation actually is: are you breathing well or and
Yes.
efficiently, or are you breathing
Yeah.
poorly? Now, whether you
Yeah.
use your nose or your mouth is part of that equation, but it's not the only thing. So if I'm breathing with very poor mechanics, if I'm breathing
Mm.
shallow but I'm using my nose, is that going to be helpful? Potentially not. So the question is, there's a number of things that are related to the efficiency of our breathing. Which hole we use to get it in is just one part of that
Yeah.
equation. The speed, the size of the breath,
Yeah.
those two things manipulate our minute ventilation. The mechanics of how you breathe manipulate where it goes within to the body. That helps with oxygen
Mm-hmm.
uptake. Your CO2 tolerance, but dependent on the speed, like that builds into the efficiency of oxygen. It says it goes wide. That's my very small little quick rant of, like, it's not just about whether
Yeah.
it's nasal or whether it's mouth breathing, because you can breathe better with the mouth. You don't, just because your mouth breathe, you don't have to pant.
Mm.
Just because your mouth breathe, you don't have to upper chest vertical breathe. I can
Yeah.
diaphragmatically
Yeah. Yeah.
larger,
Yeah. Yeah.
slower breaths, but I just have to be
Uh-huh.
aware. It comes back to what you said at the first, the starting point: awareness, number one.
Awareness.
And
Yeah.
I think preceding awareness becomes education, and that's what this podcast is about, and my
Yeah.
work, and I know a lot of your work is about providing education so people can understand, and then bring your awareness, and then make your informed decisions and choices about where you want to do it.
Exactly.
I think the
Yeah.
word you used really nicely was like, you used the word skill or skillfully, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't use that, but I
Skillful
think it's
means, yeah.
really
It's a
nice though
Buddhist
for.
term, actually. Yeah. It
Well,
works lovely, doesn't
it's
it? But
nice.
and
I've not thought about it for breathing. It's really nice for breathing to be like, what? How can you skillfully use your
how
breathing
can
in
you,
this
and it's
instance? I love
also,
that.
so skillful is such a great term, and this is something from Buddhism, and it is about experience. So really, then it maps onto everything. Skillful means, like, how that's what's the most skillful thing to do in this situation.
Yeah, love that.
First we have attention, and then once we have attention and awareness of what we're doing, what's the most skillful way to proceed? But we need to create space in order to do that, because we're either
Yeah,
reacting, or we kind of come into rest. We have our attention, we allow our awareness to be broad or tight on what we want it to be on, and then with that data, with that true information that's as close to reality as we can get, it's not the story we're telling ourselves about it, it is as close to the real thing as we can get. What's the most skillful way to proceed?
yeah,
We have conditioned patterns which we need because they save us time, you know And then we have skillful choices that we can make. And skillful means for me in the breath is, well, okay, what is, based on what I'm doing right now and based on what I want to be doing in the next 10 minutes to an hour, what's the most skillful way to proceed?
Yeah, I love that. Love that. We have potentially ran out of time. I know, and there's about I want to talk about the 2 hours of I want to take 2 hours to talk about the 2 hours of meditation that you do, but maybe we have to do that another time, right?
Let's give it a whole
Yeah. Well, you have
episode.
to
Yeah.
promise me you're one of. There's not many people as hard to. You have to promise me and the listeners that you will be available for that. You're with
I
all of your things and your
I
busyness. You're
solemnly
hard
swear.
to track
I
down.
solemnly swear I will make time for it.
How about we do that one in person? I come to your place. I bring the podcast studio in the camper van, and we do that at your place. There you
Let's
go.
do
There's
it.
a deal. There's a deal.
Perfect.
Right, you heard it, listeners. We're gonna make that happen. Um, Andrew Tracey, the superhero, AT. Just very quickly, as you sign off, just let people know where they can contact you, where they can follow you, where they can learn from your wisdom.
Yeah, the shop front, as yes, it is for everybody now, is Instagram. I'm the Andrew.Tracey on Instagram. You can read my musings in Men's Health magazine every month. But generally, yeah, everything you want to know, you can find via Instagram. If not, you can ask me there.
Cool. Awesome, mate. I know you have to go. Thanks so much for joining. I look forward to bringing
Thank you for
the
having me. I look forward to
podcast
participating
camper van to do it in person next time.
in sunny Essex. Take care, mate.
Take care, dude. Bye.
Bye.
There we have Andrew Tracey on the Between Breaths podcast. I told you were going to be in for a treat. I hope you've enjoyed that. Those 3 practical tips that you can literally use later today in the gym or tomorrow in your workout or your run, whatever it is that you're doing. The awareness of being consciously aware of your breathing as a starting point. We I talk about that so much. I'm glad that that's his like number one go-to thing. When we are consciously aware of it, we can then do something with it. And then point 2 is around when and where are you breathing, paying attention to if you're doing some resistance work, which portion of the lift in the concentric or the eccentric. So during the extension part of it, whether that's the extension or whether that's the concentric or the eccentric, the extension part being a stronger inhale, and then on the flexion portion of the exercise, a stronger exhalation. And then the third and final point was using those breathing gears. And the thing I loved about I've called it before, breathing continuum, those that follow my sports performance course, but it's the same principle. Those different shifts, those different sections, those different gears, as he describes, between nasal breathing and building all the way up to mouth breathing. And that's something that I know that I use within all my training. It's the thing that I teach all the athletes that I work with. And it opens up that conversation of, okay, I can use my mouth. It's not all about nasal breathing. No, it's always about breathing well and breathing efficiently and effectively. And the sentence or the phrase that's ringing through my ears that he left us with was, what's the most skillful way for me to proceed right now? And particularly with my breathing, what's the most skillful thing I can do with my breathing right now because of where I'm currently at and where I want to get to? And I love the notion of like using our breath skillfully. And that is something that will sit and ruminate with me for quite some time. So I hope you have enjoyed that. Do let us know what you think. Thank you so much already for the support that we've had for the podcast. It's been amazing to hear how well it's being received. So thank you for everyone that has been watching. Thank you for everyone that's been sharing it. Thank you for everyone that's subscribed to the podcast, either via, if you watch it on YouTube, I know a lot of you, it's on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever it is that you like to consume the podcast. Please do give us a review and a rating. It really helps with the spreading of the podcast itself. And if you find particular episodes that really resonate with you or you think would be beneficial for somebody else, I would love you to share that with those people. And I thank you for those that have already shared and those that will be sharing this one and future episodes as well. So as ever, I look forward to seeing or listening to, well, I guess we're not listening to you, are we? You're listening to me and potentially the guest, but I'm looking forward to the next episode already. We'll be in for another treat. And until then, you've been listening and breathing. I've been Jacko. He'd been and still is gonna be authentically Andrew Tracey. Until next time, keep it nasal.